Item number 12, an application for a certificate of appropriateness at 807 Park Avenue, located within the Upper East Side Historic District. Docket number 157491, block 1409, lot 72. This is an altered style apartment building originally built as a Romanesque revival neo-Renaissance style residence designed by Neville and Bagg in 1898-99 and enlarged in the 1980s. Application is to demolish the building and construct a new building. This was last presented February 10th, 2015.
I was just explaining studies. They can always return on one item if they can't work it out with staff. They don't have to bring everything. Just, oh my God.
Oh, I saw this.
Okay.
State Preservation staff. You last saw this on February 17th, and as you may recall, it's a proposal to demolish this building, which consists of a fragment, a five-story fragment of a late 19th century tenement and later 1980s addition. And at that time, there was a lot of discussion about the fragment and the significance of the fragment, and some felt that the fragment should either be retained and used in the new design, or that the new design should in some way recall the fragment. And the applicants have prepared some new materials for you that they will discuss then.
Thank you, Lisa. We'll reopen the hearing.
Can you get to the new presentation?
Is it Lisa?
Needs to go quite far, sorry.
Oh, I don't know what it's.
It's way down at the end. There. At the last public meeting, you asked that we look at the possibilities of incorporating the existing fragment, this portion here, in a new, not necessarily new, but in a Park Avenue apartment building. We've used for that purpose, and only for that purpose, our design that we presented. That's for convenience, because in truth, if this were to be retained, an entirely new design would be called for. So this is for convenience. This existing fabric to be placed on an apartment building, we think is a very misleading and rather deceitful, in fact, way of showing it, because it does not represent what is there. It is, in fact, a very thin facade, and we will demonstrate that shortly. What do I do to get to there? We've done a very careful analysis of our design in conjunction with the existing facade. It shows you the extraordinary similarities. If you can see this, I think you can refer to the booklets, it may be better. If you can see the imposition of the compositional lines of our proposal over the existing building. It appears that they are very similar, and in fact they work together. That's somewhat deceptive, as the actual dimensions and proportions don't quite work, and that is significant. We think that to actually place this late 19th century facade on a new building, as I said, is misleading. It gives a completely wrong impression. We think a far better way is to imply the past, to show evidence of the history of the building that was there by either implication or by actually using parts of that building to on the proposed facade. What we've done here is taken some of these compositional lines, and by the way, we work very much that way. The whole idea of scale and proportion is the way that we work on architecture, especially in historic districts, so that it isn't a coincidence that there is a similarity between these two. But what we're showing here, for example, is an emphasized cornice line that corresponds to the cornice line that was there, an emphasis here of another element, which is that element above the arched windows there. Here we've introduced something additional, which is the cornice line that is typical of the tripartite apartment building in the district, especially on Park Avenue. We've also introduced here a diaper course, which is on the original building. This is a portion of it. It is approximately in the same location. It is there. That is,
It will be new material.
it will have to be new material, yes. And this diaper course is something that you see on other buildings, former tenement buildings on Park Avenue. There's one right up the street on the corner of 75th Street. This building, by the way, is between 74th and 75th, for those of you who haven't been here previously, which it's a really wonderful example. And that one has a pronounced and very beautiful diaper course. We also have down here an element which again is reminiscent of the architrave, which you see beyond that line down there. This is the, well, I'll skip by that. That's our proposal, but it shows it with these elements incorporated. There you see the diaper course. You see that new cornice line corresponding to other cornice lines on Park. You see the element at the cornice, emphasized cornice at the top of what was the tenement building. So we've done it. So what we've done is we've tried to bring memory and meaning by representing what was there, not by that literal imposition, which we think is, again, artificial and incorrect. Here again, you see it in a rather faint isometric. And here, this leads into the fact that we think very strongly that the tenement building of 1899 just cannot be imposed on Park Avenue apartment building. It can remain by itself there, but it cannot be imposed. They are different animals, and they shouldn't. It shouldn't be. We will demonstrate this by some exploration of these buildings here. This is a section, cross-section. Here is a section that shows the existing, and dotted here the original. This is showing with the fragment retained, and the problem here is, of course, that the tenement building's dimensions are not realistic for an apartment building on Park Avenue. This is approximately 27% of the overall building, and the ceiling heights here are just not the contemporary ceiling heights and not appropriate ones. They approach, especially here, those of what used to be the FHA standards, which are not exactly what we are dealing with and should be dealing with today. This is our proposed section, which allows for a suitable, although not overly generous, floor-to-ceiling height.
Can I ask a question for the
Yes,
board?
please.
You're using a steel structure for this relatively short span building. Is there a reason why you couldn't use a flat plate concrete structure?
The structural engineer is here, and I am about to introduce him. I think that question should be addressed to him.
Okay, I mean, the reason I'm asking is because the steel structure is what's creating a 10'7" floor-to-floor into an 8'7" clear, right?
We've looked into it, we proposed that, we've looked into it. And there are very definite reasons why it doesn't work and why we have chosen this way of doing it. A lot of it relates to the existence of the existing parts to be retained. Anyway, Richard Donald, who I will introduce now, is the one to explain that. In fact, I will introduce him. Richard Donald.
I'm sorry.
Yes, Michael?
I am still having trouble grasping, and perhaps you could explain more, maybe Bill Higgins could do this, why the implication of an artifact is more honest than the artifact which is extant.
Because I think if you look at the artifact, you think you're seeing something that really is, first of all, is there. You can see that in the existing building. You look at it, you think that tenement building is still there in some way, when actually all you're seeing is 3 stories of a 12-inch thick brick facade. I think that's deceptive myself.
Well,
And
I think perhaps the museum world is in a
but anyway,
world
our
where
problem is
this is our approach.
we don't think it works. I mean, it has to work for a building, and it hasn't worked, and we will come to that in a minute. This is part of the problem. What is there now is an example of, and it's 30 to 35-year-old example on which millions and millions of dollars have been spent with multiple owners, all of whom have given up and sold the building to the next person. I mean, the proof, we think, is there. Anyway, Richard, you're up. The elevation?
Yes, the elevation that you had before, showing the existing building. That was good. That's good. Thank you. Okay, everybody, my name is Richard Donald. I'm a structural engineer. I've been in practice for 25 years, and
Could you use a microphone, please?
my name is Richard Donald, and I'm a structural engineer. I've been in practice for 25 years, and in that time, I have come across and done a great deal of historic preservations and repaired many buildings with extreme distress, and so I feel that when I'm talking about this particular building, I have a pretty good understanding of the problems that we're going to encounter in preserving the facade and in building the new building. I also want to say that by coincidence, in the 1990s, this was one of the first projects that I had as a structural engineer. And the project at that time was to, for a different owner, of course, but the project at that time was to totally gut the interior of the building, or a great part of the interior of the building, and reconfigure the floors and turn, what we did is we turned this into a two-story, I'm sorry, from here to here became a two-story space when it was a one-story space at the time. We also removed a great deal of the interior floor slabs and reframed them in steel and metal deck, and used also C-joists in a totally different way than the original framing of the building. So what I wanted to mention in that early renovation was that we stripped the rear of this facade, and we found that instead of having a integral masonry structure, it was nothing but a composite of miscellaneous masonry. Brickbats, we found pieces of wood in there, block, bits of metal, and what we had to do in order to transform this into a two-story space and reframe the floors, we had to brace all of this at the back with straps and connection plates and tie it back into the sidewalls. And that was an extremely difficult project because none of this really was integral at all. It's just a series of masonry units, and what we were concerned about, of course, was a collapse. Of course, that didn't happen, luckily, and we managed to brace it and stabilize it. And so from that, I just want to segue into what we are planning to do today. If we are to keep this facade, what we will need to do is to recognize that no matter how careful we are in bracing it back, and it will require an exceptionally complicated series of steel braces, either coming out into the street or going back into the shell of the building. To do that, even if we did that, we would be running a severe risk of losing some of these pieces. And I just want to point out that even if we were to take all the care in the world, we have to understand that this building cannot be built, this project cannot be built, unless we keep the side walls of the building. That's a part of the, that's a sine qua non of this structure, this new project, because of zoning issues, I understand. So we are also saddled with the problem of keeping the side walls, the north and the south walls, as well as this facade. And in order to do that, we have to go into a great deal of structural gymnastics to keep the side walls all the way up the building and to keep this fragment. So it becomes a real problem, a real challenge for any engineer. And a high-risk one. So having said that, I'd just like to mention that one more thing we will have to do as a part of that project would be to secure any pieces of, small pieces of masonry back to whatever steel structure we design, temporary steel structure that we design. And one of the problems with doing that in this particular case is that that masonry has already been drilled in the 90s. It's already been connected back to straps that are remaining in the building. So if we drill more holes in a already drilled masonry structure, we're running the risk of having them disintegrate. So we'll have to deal with that issue as well. Now, finally, I'd just like to mention or give you an answer as to why we're considering a steel structure in this building. The reason is that as I mentioned, we have to keep the side walls of the building. That's a requirement of the project, and I don't profess to understand why. It's a zoning issue, and that's the rules of the game. So, in order to do that, we have to imagine that a contractor. We have to try to guess how a contractor would build this. First, he's got to brace those side walls, which are just load-bearing, unreinforced masonry walls. They go up 12 stories, and then we have to stabilize them. And imagine that a contractor might choose to knock all the floors out and keep the 12-story walls in place and have a basic, I guess, for lack of a better term, a cavern in there. And at the same time, then, we would need to keep this fragment that we're being asked to potentially to save. So in order to keep those side walls, we need a steel frame in there which would support the walls, brace them. I mean all the three walls, the front wall now, the fragment wall, and the two side walls. We need moment frames, we need X bracing in the in-plane direction, that's the east-west direction, and we have to be able to keep a open shell of a three-sided building in place until the new floors are installed. That's pretty much why we've gone to steel and why we are not considering a concrete frame.
And you couldn't span the width of the building with a deck, with a high-strength deck? I'm just saying, like, you've got a 2-foot floor structure there, and that's what's creating the incompatibility of this facade to the building, right? That's the basis, that's one of the 2 feet upon which this argument stands. And I'm just trying to explore that. We're talking about, what is it, 35 feet wide building?
25.
25?
25.
You can't span 25 feet with high-strength deck on a steel frame?
No, you can't span with a high-strength deck, but you can span with a hollow core slab. A hollow core concrete slab, basically plank, can span 25 feet, and we've looked at that, and we may well use that system for the floors that are coming. But the problem is to break, it's not a question of spanning, it's a question of bracing the walls that have to remain.
But
That's
if you
the
were to
problem.
use a plank system or some other system that would allow you to reduce the floor depth from 2 feet to 1 foot, let's say, then all of a sudden the ceiling heights in this version and that version would be the same.
Right.
We have 9'7" clear versus 9'7" clear, or more or less.
The floor heights are an issue that I can't speak to as an engineer, of course. But what I can tell you is that the spanning problem is not the crucial problem engineering, from a structural engineering perspective. It's to stabilize those walls until you get the new floors in, whatever the system of the new floors is. Plank, metal deck, poured-in-place structure. So having adopted or understood that steel framing is needed in this vertical direction, we naturally want to continue the steel framing for the floors.
And if you didn't have to keep these two, the parallel floor, walls, and stabilize them, and you were free to build it any which way you wanted to, then you'd be able to retain the fragment without being hindered. Is that correct?
We could do anything if you throw enough money at it. I mean, I think the answer to your question is it could be done. Is it a very high-risk endeavor to do that? Yes, I believe it still is a high-risk endeavor. You will need either an internal bracing system that would brace the front back to the rear of the building, or if we could get the permit to take the bracing structure out into the sidewalk.
Would it allow you to then opt for a different system of floors and without the steel, as Michael suggested, because you're not stabilizing two walls anymore? So it seems like the fact that you have to stabilize these two walls on either side is driving a lot of the design decisions. And you're saying that's a zoning issue?
Commissioner, it's driving all of them.
But why, I don't understand why you've chosen to do that, which is compromising, at least even exploring the idea.
This is an alteration, and if it not, it would be a new building. And a new building, the easements wouldn't apply, and the building wouldn't be possible. It wouldn't be possible. So we must retain it.
Okay, all right, it's just an odd contradiction because ultimately you're coming to us for a new building. So, but then you're saying it's an alteration and it's for other reasons.
The building department does not consider this to be a new building.
Okay. Yes.
In-
Go ahead, Bob.
In the past, I've seen cases where the building department allows you to retain only a minor portion of the existing wall. You can almost, I know of one case in Queens where they brought it down to basically 2 courses of brick, and it was considered as alteration. Basically, the entire building was new, and that was an alteration permit.
Yeah, I think they've
Right.
changed.
Yeah, okay.
They've become much. today.
Right, right.
We
Happened there.
have retained the minimum. We have not retained anything that we don't have to. We have to retain what we are.
Yes,
We're having comments now.
yes.
So,
We have more to present. This
you
is
do?
not a presentation.
You sure?
I'm sorry for that.
All right, Charles, why don't you complete the presentation?
The proof really is here.
All revved up.
It's all very well to talk about, about keeping these fragments here, but the proof is there. And Commissioner, you asked about the deceptive part of it and what is that. The proof of that really was that 25 to 30 people testified here about keeping that fragment, and their testimony was basically based on a misunderstanding of what was historic and what was there and what was behind it. They even went so far as to accuse me of being the architect for this building that we wish to demolish. They were quite confused. And I think, I mean,
I
that,
think otherwise, Mr. Platt. You're confused.
If the audience can please not make comments. Yes.
it's a failed building, to which the owner who is here will testify. And as I said, this has been through many ownerships over a period of years, and there have been multi-millions of dollars spent trying to make this building work. It doesn't work.
Madam Chair, we have two more speakers, Google, please.
And here we show you here where those windows on the top level of the retained fragment are jammed into the ceiling, creating a really awkward proportion here where you have the lower windows very close to the bottom, and you have this big expanse here, and then you have these windows up above. Really, I mean, double hung windows that high in a room or in any space really aren't satisfactory. Here you have the existing problem of where the windows are jammed down against the sill to make the outer openings work with what's inside. The very small heating element rises above the windowsill. There again, you see them all together. That's it, I guess. But Michael, would you like to say a word about the economic situation with respect to this building?
Good afternoon, my name is Mike Betancourt, I'm the developer. We acquired this building in around 2004, and we attempted to do a full gut rehab to maintain the current fabric as it stands today into 3 quadplexes. So we did an extensive rehabilitation of the building and tried to sell it as 3 stacked townhouses. And we've been largely unsuccessful. The developer before me attempted the same cartwheels in the 90s. They did a rehabilitation of the building, they failed. So we thought our vision would be successful. We attempted to deliver to the market back around 2008, 2009. We invested significant dollars, which is probably not relevant to this conversation. But the end result is that we couldn't exit. We couldn't sell to the market. The hindrances that the market has spoken to us was primarily trying to infuse current infrastructure, heating and air conditioning that modern buildings need to deliver within the constraints of these 8-foot something ceiling heights. So the inability for this building within its constraints to deliver modern amenities, the market has not supported us. We've largely been trying to sell these units since we completed in 2008 and have been utter failures. So really 2 developers attempted the same business plan by doing a full gut rehabilitation of the building to exit as condominiums, and we both failed. To deliver full 8 or 9 to 10 foot ceilings, modern flats on Park Avenue, we believe
we'll be able to add a good building to the neighborhood and hopefully create an exit for us.
Just one more thing here that is important, that this is not the only example of this type of building. This is not, this, meaning the retained fabric here, is not the only example in this district, and certainly not on Park Avenue itself. Bill Higgins will talk to you about that. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Bill Higgins of Higgins Quayspark. I will try to make this brief. As a historic preservationist, I really don't have anything to offer on structural issues, and I don't have anything to offer on economic issues or on the niceties of how the interiors are laid out. But I do think I have something to offer. This is one of those situations that is to me, is both the delight and the frustration of being in historic preservation. We have a very strange situation here, where we have part or most or some of the facade of an 1897 building that in some unclear way and by some unclear path, by the time it was designated as a 5-story building, it was a 12-story building. And the old facade was partially incorporated into this new building. That is a very odd situation, architecturally, historically, and in almost every other way. And I find that I found myself thinking, where is there some wisdom that can help me to understand and express this? And I'm going to cite a name, the name of James Marston Fitch, who was the founder of the Columbia Preservation Program and who was a friend and colleague of many of us in the room, and who was in fact an early landmarks commissioner. And Jim Fitch always talked about the curatorial decisions that need to be made in historic preservation. And we, all of us, as historic preservationists, in addition to whatever other profession we may follow, are really curators. And it's these curatorial decisions, what is the right thing to do, that guides and melds with the design skill of the architect and with the technical skills of building conservators and engineers and the whole other raft of people who make this an old building happen. I think what we have here is a curatorial decision. And when Fitch was talking about curatorial decisions, he always talked about the range of interventions. And they, in his parlance, interventions could range all the way from preservation, which just froze a building in its present state and did nothing, to restoration, which chooses a particular point and follows the research and the evidence to come as close to that as possible, to all sorts of levels of adaptive reuse, all the way to replacement of the building, which of course is what we are proposing now. And among the factors that help us to decide among that range of interventions, there's not one that is right or one that is wrong. It all depends on the situation. One of the major factors is integrity. And integrity seems to me to be a combination of the physical state of the building and also of the cultural information that the building has to convey and how well it does or does not convey that information. You've heard a lot, and as I said, I'm not the person to speak definitively on this, about physical issues, aspects of the gymnastics that would need to be done in order to make this facade incorporated into a new building, and what you would need to do in order to frame it in such a way that you get ceiling heights that work, et cetera, et cetera. I think the one thing I could conclude from all of this testimony is that these physical interventions are not typical. They are somewhat extraordinary. And the result of those somewhat extraordinary physical interventions would be something that incorporates a fragment of an old building, a large fragment of an old facade, and something above it that might be modern, that might be duplicative of the historic vocabulary, that might be something in between, but it would be an unusual level of intervention. And usually, it seems to me, that level of intervention is reserved for a historic building or fragment that is really pretty unusual and really pretty significant. And I think that comes down to the ultimate curatorial question here. Is this historic fabric, because there is historic fabric in there, but does the total composition, is it still historic as a total building, and is it of a level of significance that really warrants this level of intervention, or could it serve for this district by giving way to a new building, which I think we probably all agree is a creditable modern building that does many, many things to keep this the spirit and character of this district. So I'll finish by simply in helping to answer that question, just citing some objective fact. People talked about this building as being a memory of what Park Avenue used to be when there were lower buildings and it was a 5-story tenement. And that's very valid, the layering of how you perceive a district. But I'll simply say this, that in the historic districts that include Park Avenue, that is the Park Avenue and the Upper East Side historic districts, there are 30 buildings that are truly at that lower 5-story and below scale. And of those 30 buildings, 13 of them were built